If the sound of Ozzy Osbourne ever filled your house or your head, you remember the feeling, the electricity, the madness, the strange comfort of knowing that someone out there was just as restless as you. Now, at 74, the man who once shouted louder than the world has fallen into a different kind of silence. The wild energy that defined him has turned into something quieter, something human. You can see it in the way he moves now, slower, careful, as if every step carries the memory of thousands of stages. The hair still dark, the eyes still fierce, but softer now, carrying the weight of decades lived in chaos and love. Time does that to people, even those who once seemed untouchable. There was a moment when Ozzy stood on a stage in front of a sea of people, and it felt like nothing could break him. But time has a way of humbling even the strongest hearts. It strips away the noise until only the truth remains. He sits now, surrounded by family, sometimes by quiet. Sharon's voice still fills the space around him, guiding him, grounding him. The house that once echoed with laughter and music now hums with something else, something more tender. He has been through storms that would crush most men, but he still finds a way to smile. The tremor in his hand, the unsteady voice, the tired eyes, none of them take away from the fire that still flickers inside. That fire never dies. It just burns slower. The same man who once walked through fire now spends his days in reflection, his nights in gratitude. It is not an ending, it is a transformation. He once fought the world, now he fights time, and somehow the second battle feels harder. The truth about Ozzy is that he never truly belonged to one world. Not to fame, not to silence, not even to the idea of being a rock legend. He has always been caught in between, a soul too restless for peace and too human for perfection. He carries both light and shadow, and at 74, you can see both clearly. When you look at him now, you do not just see the man who screamed on stage. You see a father, a husband, a survivor. You see the cost of a lifetime spent chasing sound. People talk about legacy as if it is something you can hold in your hands. But with Ozzy, it is not in the trophies or the headlines. It is in the way he made people feel, the way his songs became shelter for those who felt misunderstood, the way his chaos made others feel less alone. That is his real story. Not the scandals, not the fame, not even the stage lights. It is about the boy from Birmingham who dreamed of making noise loud enough to drown out the world, and who now, in his final years of quiet, has found a different kind of music. He no longer needs to prove anything. The fight has shifted from the stage to within. His legacy is not built on perfection, but on endurance. He has lived through what most could not, and somehow, through all of it, he found grace. If his music ever gave you courage or made you feel seen, maybe it is time to give something back. Maybe it is time to simply remember him, not for what he was, but for what he became, a man who learned to turn pain into melody and chaos into meaning. He came from the streets of Aston, a working-class corner of Birmingham, where the air smelled like iron and rain. Life was hard, simple, predictable. His father worked long shifts in the factory. His mother tried to keep food on the table, and little John Osbourne, the name before the fame, spent his days dreaming. He was not a prodigy, not a child destined for greatness. He was a boy who sang to escape the noise of machines, the arguments of adults, the heavy silence that followed long days. School never made sense to him. Words blurred on the page, numbers tangled in his head. They called him slow, but music understood him in ways people never could. He used to walk home barefoot sometimes, humming to himself, the rhythm of his steps matching the beat of songs no one had written yet. There was nothing glamorous about that life, nothing that hinted at what would come, just a boy with calloused hands and restless eyes, watching the world pass by from behind factory smoke. Birmingham was gray, cold, but it taught him something important: survival. You learned to work hard, to take a hit, to get back up. Those lessons would later become the core of his strength, long before he stepped on any stage. The first job he ever held was in a slaughterhouse, a grim place that would have broken most people. But to him, It was just another reminder that life and death were always close. The smell, the sound, the constant repetition, all of it shaped the rhythm of his later music, that dark pulse people would one day call heavy metal. At night, he would lie in bed, listening to the trains pass, and wonder if there was something more out there. He didn't know where to start. He just knew he could not stay where he was. Then came music. Not from a teacher or a church, but from the streets. A guitar, a drum beat, a few boys with the same hunger. They started small, in garages and bars that smelled of beer and sweat. The first time he sang, people turned. It was not a perfect voice, not trained or soft. It was raw, full of pain and fire. It came from the same place. His childhood came from the factory, the cold, the hunger. People felt it because it was real. That was all Ozzy ever knew how to be. He found belonging in that sound. For the first time, he was not the boy who failed at school. He was the voice that made others feel alive. The more he sang, the more he felt like he was escaping the small world that had trapped him. But even then, there was no plan. No one thought it would last. It was just music to survive another day. Birmingham still surrounded him. Gray skies above, steel beneath. Yet within him, something began to burn. He didn't call it ambition. He just wanted to make enough noise so that the world would notice he existed. Looking back now, those early years feel like the beginning of a long storm. They were filled with small joys, rough hands, and big dreams. Every struggle shaped his voice. Every hardship added a layer of truth. Without a Stan, there would be no Ozzy Osbourne. The city made him hard, but it also made him honest. He would later say that he was never meant to be a hero, never meant to be rich or famous, and he just wanted to sing. And from that simple wish came a sound that would echo far beyond the smoky streets where it all began. Fame came to Ozzy the way a storm arrives, loud, unexpected, and impossible to stop. One moment he was still the boy from Birmingham. The next he was standing under blinding lights with a microphone in his hand and the world watching. Black Sabbath was born out of noise and frustration, a sound that matched the chaos inside him. It was raw, heavy, like thunder in a bottle. When he first screamed into that microphone, it was not about art or fame, it was about release, about shouting back at a world that had never listened. The audience felt it. They did not just hear him, they understood him. The rage, the confusion, the loneliness. For the first time, someone was brave enough to give it a sound. The rise was fast and wild. Tour buses, hotel rooms, crowds that roared like oceans. The money came, the fame came, and with it, the pressure. He was not ready for the world to love him and fear him at the same time. Every concert felt like flying and falling at once. He would step on stage and the lights would blind him. The noise would shake his bones, and for a few minutes he felt untouchable. But when the lights went out, silence hit harder than applause. He would sit in the dark of some hotel room, hands still shaking, mind still racing, wondering if the world would still care when the music stopped. People called him the Prince of Darkness, but he never saw himself that way. He was just Ozzy, a man who loved to make people feel something. Behind the makeup, the stage outfits, the chaos, there was a shy man who missed home, who missed being just a person. He would write letters to Sharon between shows, small notes that said how much he missed her, how strange it felt to live inside the noise. She was his anchor, even when fame tried to pull him apart. She saw the man, not the myth. The success of Black Sabbath changed music forever. Their songs became the voice of a generation that felt unseen. The riffs were heavy, the lyrics dark, but they spoke about real fears, war, death, pain, the loss of innocence. Ozzy did not write stories, he screamed the truth. And in that truth, people found freedom. His voice became a symbol for anyone who ever felt different. But the higher he climbed, the more fragile he became. The endless touring, the sleepless nights, the chaos behind the stage, it started to consume him. He was living the dream, but the dream was eating him alive. He tried to escape the pressure through laughter, through madness, through anything that numbed the emptiness, but no matter how wild the night, the morning always came. And with it came a feeling he could not describe, the sense that something inside him was breaking. The fame that once made him feel alive started to feel like a cage. Everywhere he went, people expected the legend, not the man. He began to lose himself in the noise he had created. The face in the mirror became harder to recognize. Still, he kept singing, because on stage, everything made sense. The lights, the sound, the crowd. They became his heartbeat. In those moments, he belonged. It was his sanctuary, the one place where he could exist without explaining himself. The band members around him could feel it too. They were not just playing music, they were surviving it. There were moments of pure magic too. He remembered standing in front of thousands, holding the last note of a song, feeling the whole world breathe with him. In those seconds, the pain, the fear, the noise, it all made sense. It was worth it. But deep down, he knew fame was a tide that never stayed still. It lifted you high, then pulled you under when you least expected it. When he looked out into the crowd, he sometimes wondered if anyone saw him for who he really was. A man who had climbed out of the factories of Birmingham, carrying only his voice and his will to survive. Fame had given him everything, but it had also taken pieces he could never get back. He had become a legend, but legends do not get to rest. And Ozzy, even in his glory, already sensed the storm that was waiting beyond the stage lights. The fall did not happen all at once. It crept in quietly, hidden behind years of applause. The body that had carried him through 1,000 nights on stage began to slow, tremble, and betray him. At first it was just fatigue, a stumble here and there, a note that cracked in the middle of a song. He thought it was just age or exhaustion, something that rest would fix. But rest never fixed it. The shaking in his hands grew stronger, the stiffness in his limbs more stubborn. Doctors gave it a name, one that would change everything: Parkinson's. For Ozzy, the word felt like a verdict. He had faced chaos before, but this was different. This was not a battle he could fight with willpower or music. It was a slow surrender, one day at a time. The stage became both home and enemy. Each performance took more from him than it gave. He would walk off, drenched in sweat, breathing hard, trying to hide the pain. Fans still cheered, the lights still burned bright, but inside, he knew he was running out of strength. There were days when he could barely stand, when he needed help just to move across a room. Sharon would take his hand, steady him, and whisper that he was still her rock. Even if the world saw weakness, her love became the thing that kept him alive when the noise faded. The hardest part was not the pain. It was the loss of control. His voice, his hands, his walk. The things that had always defined him were no longer his to command. Some mornings he would stare at the mirror, eyes tired, trying to find the man he used to be. Fame had once been his shield, but now it felt like a spotlight on his frailty. He hated being seen as fragile. He wanted people to remember the energy, the fire, the madness, not the slow movements and soft words. Yet even in his frustration, there was grace. He learned to laugh at himself, to turn the pain into humor, to remind everyone that he was still Ozzy, still alive, still fighting. The world watched as the man who had once defied every limit began to face, the one he could not escape, but instead of hiding, he chose to speak. He shared his diagnosis openly, not as a cry for pity, but as a message of strength. He told the world that being vulnerable did not mean being broken. He showed millions that courage sometimes looks like waking up each day and trying again. The reaction was overwhelming. Fans across the globe wrote letters, sent messages, and thanked him for being real. They said his honesty gave them hope, and that, more than anything, reminded him why he started making music in the first place. There were nights when the pain kept him awake, when memories of the stage filled his mind. He would think about the crowds, the roar, the energy, and in the quiet of his room, he would hum old melodies, barely audible, like a prayer to the life he once lived. Sharon would listen from another room, knowing that for him, singing was not performance anymore, it was survival. The same voice that had once moved mountains now trembled softly in the dark, but it still carried truth. He learned to find beauty in stillness, to sit in the garden and watch the sun move across the sky, to feel grateful for mornings when he could walk without help, for evenings when the pain gave him peace. The man who had lived fast, loud, and reckless now found meaning in silence. And somehow, that silence was louder than any crowd he had ever faced. There were moments when despair came close, but he refused to let it win. He had spent his whole life being misunderstood, judged, and yet loved. Now, facing his greatest challenge, he showed the world a different kind of strength. Not the wild, untamed force of his youth, but a quiet, enduring courage. The world saw a man who would not give up. They saw a husband who still made his wife laugh, a father who still smiled at his children, a legend who still believed in the healing power of music. In the end, it was not the illness that defined him. It was the way he faced it with honesty, humor, and an unbroken heart. The same spirit that once screamed through amplifiers now whispered through the tremor of his voice. And somehow, it was even more powerful than before. There came a time when Ozzy stopped asking why. The fight against his body had taken so much out of him that he began to see life differently. He no longer measured days by what he could do, but by what he could still feel. The world that once spun around him so fast now moved slowly, gently, almost like it was waiting for him to catch up. He started to notice the small things again, the sunlight spilling through the curtains, the way Sharon's hand felt when it rested on his. There was peace in that quiet. After a lifetime of noise, silence no longer scared him. It began to heal him. He often spoke about gratitude. It was a word he used more and more. He said he was grateful for every song he ever sang, for every fan who ever believed in him, for the simple gift of still being here. In his eyes, you could see a calm acceptance, a kind of wisdom that only comes after walking through fire. He had learned to forgive himself for the chaos of his youth, for the mistakes that came with fame, for the years lost to pain. Now he saw his journey as a lesson, not a punishment. Life had given him everything, taken much of it back, and yet somehow left him with enough to be thankful for. His mornings were slower now. He would sit by the window, cup of tea in hand, looking out at the garden, the dogs playing in the grass. He talked about how he used to chase happiness all over the world, thinking it lived in applause and headlines. Now, he found it in quiet moments, in laughter shared at the kitchen table, in the sound of family moving through the house. Sharon would sometimes catch him smiling to himself and ask what he was thinking. He would shrug and say, "Just remembering." He realized that peace was never something you find on stage. It lives in the spaces between songs, in the people who love you when the lights go out. The man who once lived for the chaos of the crowd now found comfort in the predictability of routine. The world still called him a legend, but he just wanted to be a husband, a father, a man still learning how to live. There were still hard days, days when the tremor was stronger, when the body refused to move the way he wanted, but instead of anger, he met it with patience. He had learned that fighting everything only made the pain louder. Acceptance made it bearable. Some mornings he would look at Sharon and whisper that he was lucky. Lucky to have lived, to have loved, to still be here to tell the story. That was the truth. He had come to understand survival is not about winning, it is about staying long enough to learn. He spoke softly in interviews, his voice gentler now, his words slower but clearer. When asked if he missed the old days, he would smile and say, "Every day, but I am not supposed to stay there. The past was the stage. The present is the song that plays after the crowd goes home." His eyes would wander as if seeing something far away, maybe a memory of the first time he heard his own voice through a speaker. Maybe he was thinking of the boy in Birmingham who never imagined living long enough to see all this. He had come full circle, from the noise to the silence, from chaos to peace. He realized that his legacy was not built on how long he could scream, but on how long he could love. His music had been about rebellion, but his life had become about resilience. In the stillness of his home, he found something even louder than rock and roll, the sound of gratitude. It filled the spaces where pain used to live. It was never about fame anymore. It was about peace. A peace that took a lifetime to find, but once it arrived, it stayed. And maybe that was the most powerful thing he ever created. Not a song, not a moment on stage, but the quiet truth that a man can lose almost everything and still end up grateful for what remains. The day came when he stood on a stage again, not as the wild man the world remembered, but as a survivor. The lights felt softer this time, the crowd quieter, almost reverent. He moved slowly, every step measured, every breath deliberate. There was no screaming, no chaos, just the weight of a lifetime pressing gently against his chest. He held the microphone close, his hands trembling, his voice deeper, worn, but real. The first note cracked, and the crowd erupted not because it was perfect, but because it was him. For a moment, the years fell away. He was the same man who once made the world tremble, standing in front of thousands who still loved him exactly as he was. And in that moment, he smiled. The lights glimmered off the tears he tried to hide. Sharon stood at the side of the stage, her hand over her heart, knowing how much it took for him to be there. Every lyric sounded like a farewell, every chord like a heartbeat. It was not just music anymore. It was memory, love, and closure, all blending together. When he sang, his voice carried both strength and fragility, like a flame refusing to die. The audience sang with him, word for word, their voices merging into something sacred. It was not about fame or legacy. It was about connection. One last conversation between a man and the people who had walked his journey with him. And in that moment, the pain faded. The tremor stopped. He felt whole again, not because the illness disappeared, but because the music filled every broken place inside him. He raised his hand, the lights caught it, and for a heartbeat, it felt like time itself paused. The roar of the crowd wrapped around him like an embrace. He whispered, "Thank you," barely audible, but everyone heard it. He did not say goodbye. He said, "Thank you." After the show, when the noise had quieted and the stage went dark, he sat backstage surrounded by silence. The same kind of silence that once frightened him now felt peaceful. He closed his eyes and listened to the echoes of his own voice lingering in the air. Sharon came to him, knelt beside him, and whispered, "You did it." He laughed softly, that old laugh that once filled arenas, and said, "I just wanted to sing one more time." Outside, fans waited in the cold night air, holding signs, tears running down their faces. They had grown older with him. His songs were the soundtrack to their lives, their pain, their healing. And now they were there to return the favor, to give him back the love he had poured into the world for decades. That night was not a concert. It was communion. A final reminder that the bond between an artist and his people does not fade when the music stops. And in that moment, as he looked out one last time, he realized something profound. All his life he had been chasing sound, chasing meaning, chasing survival. But what he had really been chasing was the understanding that he was never alone. Every lyric he ever wrote, every note he ever sang, was an echo of something shared. The pain, the joy, the struggle, the love, it was all connected. The audience was not separate from him. They were part of him, just as his music had been part of them. When he left the stage that night, the applause followed him like a heartbeat fading into distance. He turned once more, raised his hand, and smiled. It was not a farewell. It was gratitude, pure and simple. The kind that only comes from a man who has lived every version of himself and finally made peace with them all. The curtain fell, the lights dimmed, and the world outside moved on. But somewhere in that silence, his voice still lingered, carried by those who needed it. And maybe that is what immortality really is, not endless life, but endless love. The kind that keeps echoing long after the music ends. The world reacted the way it always does when a legend grows quiet. At first, disbelief, then reflection. The headlines spoke of decline, but the people spoke of gratitude. Across continents, his songs played again, softly in cars, through headphones, in quiet rooms where people remembered their younger selves. His voice carried memories of youth, rebellion, heartbreak, laughter, and survival. Generations had grown up with him, and now, as he faced his final chapter, they repaid him with love. Fan letters arrived by the thousands. Some came from people who had never met him, but felt as if they had known him all their lives. They wrote about how his music saved them, how his raw honesty gave them strength when they felt lost. His words had become their shelter, his chaos their courage. Sharon read many of those letters aloud to him on quiet afternoons. He would listen, eyes half closed, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent. The man who once filled arenas now found comfort in hearing that his life had meant something beyond fame. He said, it made him feel small again, in the best way, like being part of something bigger. His children came to visit more often. They sat around the table, laughing about old stories, teasing him gently, making sure he ate. They no longer saw the rock star. They saw Dad, the man who tried, who loved, who never stopped being himself, even when the world tried to turn him into an image. Musicians from every corner of the world began to speak of his influence. They said he had taught them to be fearless, to be unapologetically real, to turn pain into art. They said his voice changed music forever. But Ozzy never thought of himself as a pioneer. He said he was just trying to survive, to make something honest in a world full of noise. That humility became his final lesson. You could be a legend and still be human. You could fall 100 times and still be worth remembering for the way you got back up. There was something poetic about the way his story came full circle. The boy from Birmingham, who once sang just to escape the factory walls, had built a bridge between darkness and light for millions. His music was no longer just about heavy riffs and rebellion. It was about endurance, love, and the strange beauty of imperfection. When people listened now, they heard more than sound. They heard a man who gave his life to expression, who turned every scar into a melody. His legacy lived not only in his records, but in the people who carried his spirit forward. Young artists continued to cover his songs, each one adding their own heartbeat to his rhythm. Families shared his story with their children, telling them about the man who refused to give up. His laughter, his rawness, his courage became a symbol of persistence, the idea that even the wildest souls can grow gentle, even the loudest voices can find peace. He did not chase legacy, it found him. It grew quietly, not in the noise of fame, but in the silence of hearts that still remembered. When fans spoke of him, they did not talk only about the music. They talked about the feeling, the sense of being seen, of being understood, of being told that it was okay to be imperfect. That was the gift he left behind. And so his name continued to echo, not through the headlines, but through people who whispered it with warmth. Ozzy was not just a man or a musician. He was a mirror of humanity, flawed, resilient, endlessly alive. His legacy was not made of gold or trophies. It was made of connection. And even now, long after the final song had faded, that connection remained unbroken. Reflecting on the journey of Ozzy Osbourne, one truth stands out above all. Life is not measured by how long the noise lasts, but by how deeply it reaches the hearts that hear it. His story was never just about fame or chaos. It was about a man who learned to live through extremes and still find his way back to love. The same voice that once echoed through stadiums now lives softly in memory, in the quiet hum of a song playing somewhere, in the way people close their eyes when they hear his name. He showed the world that it is possible to face fear, to stumble, to change, and still remain true to yourself. That is not just legacy, that is humanity. In his later days, he spoke of peace more than anything. He said it was not something you find by chasing it, but something that arrives when you stop running. He talked about forgiveness, about the importance of family, about laughter that comes even after pain. His words carried a stillness that only comes from a man who has lived every side of life. To some, he was a wild rock icon. To others, a survivor. But to those who truly understood, he was simply Ozzy, a man who dared to feel everything, to live without filters, and to share that truth with the world. His story reminds us to listen while we can, to love while we have the chance, to find meaning in the smallest moments. The fame, the fortune, the spotlight, they fade. But the impact of an honest heart endures. His journey is a reminder that strength is not about how loud we shout, but how gently we rise after falling. He gave the world more than music. He gave it honesty, a kind of raw emotion that time cannot erase. Somewhere, a young musician picks up a guitar and strums one of his songs, not to imitate, but to understand. Somewhere, a fan replays an old concert and smiles through tears, remembering the sound that once felt immortal. These moments keep his spirit alive. They are the echoes that refuse to fade. And perhaps that is the most beautiful ending of all, not silence but resonance, the kind that hums softly in the background of life, reminding us that even when the music stops, the feeling remains. If this story touched you, share it not for numbers, but for remembrance, because legends are not made from noise alone. They are built from truth, from resilience, from love that continues long after the stage lights fade. Ozzy Osbourne may have stepped away from the spotlight, but his story still echoes through time, through hearts, through every note that dares to rise again.